Hi everyone, we are Team 2.3. My name is Jackie. This is Jared, Aditi, and Jeff, and we're super excited to be talking to you all about Latin American Youth Center. So really quickly, I'm just gonna be walking you guys through an agenda right now. First, we're gonna talk about the fundamental issues we identified facing LAYC before moving into the recommendation that they kind of wanted us to look into, which was licensing their curriculum. After that, we're gonna move into their core competencies and the recommendation we came up with before finally ending on their conclusion. So while we were reading this case, we realized that there were three fundamental issues facing LAYC. The first would be stalled growth. How do we continue to grow in a sector where there's already a saturated market and individuals offering curriculums at a wide variety? Next, how do we diversify our own funding systems? Right now, we're receiving a lot of money from grants and fundraising and not enough from our own self-sustained funding. And lastly, we're missing a key resource in volunteer management. How can we continue to manage over 40 to 100 volunteers at a time without a management system? So, like I mentioned before, right now, LAYC is receiving over 80% of their funding from government and fundraising efforts, and less than 10% from their own self-sustaining cash flows. This is increasingly an issue, and that's why they came up with their licensing curriculum idea. Right now, the organization thinks it's a really great idea to license this curriculum because we can help them with their quote-unquote salsa creation, which is identifying their core competencies, putting that together with their mission, and tracking that through results. However, upon further research and analysis of this, we realized that this is not a feasible solution due to a number of reasons. First, we're facing really high fixed costs due to the fact that we are already cash-strapped and we can't afford to divert resources or train individuals for this new idea. Second, this is a saturated market. There are already over more than 5 organizations already doing this licensing curriculum idea, and they have a wide variety and brevity to their systems. And lastly, we realized that LAYC would have to charge over 300% of what other competitors are already charging in order for this venture to work for them. Moving forward, we wanted to take into account what LAYC's core competencies were in carving our recommendation. We realized you guys are really amazing at youth and development programs. You have really strong on-the-ground training, and you have this really amazing ability to work with a lot of youth and individuals to become the next leaders and workers for our generations. And that's why those are the things we wanted to take into account, your strengths, into our recommendation. And now I'm gonna pass it off to Jack to talk about that.
Thanks, Jackie. So while we were coming up with our recommendation, we wanted to keep the organization's mission in mind. We love the mission, we love the idea of creating and finding a salsa for other organizations, and we wanted to make sure that our recommendations would continue to serve the youth of Metro DC and beyond in academic, social, and career goals. Our recommendation is to build on to the awesome programming that they already offer and to actually provide a PYD conference for universities that have already existing social initiatives through clubs and organizations on campus to increase revenue growth. When we looked at this recommendation, we realized that there are 3 pillars. The first is financials. How are we gonna pay for this? We estimate that these conferences can bring about $22,000 in revenue per conference. Now, where is this gonna be funded? Well, first we wanted to look at if other universities are already paying for out-of-classroom learning initiatives. One example we found is that 19 out of 20 business schools, of the top business schools in the country, currently pay for Train the Street, a lesson that actually builds and teaches MBAs and BBAs how to model, how to go through financial analysis outside the classroom so that they can excel in interviews for internships and for full-time positions. So we knew that this was going on already. Second, we want to know if they had the funds. $22,000 seemed a little high, but we found out that looking through minutes from Georgetown University and the University of Maryland's Senate committees for financing, we found that they actually do already support initiatives for students to not only go to conferences, but they actually pay for them to host these conferences. Next, we want to look at the interest. So where is the interest and where is it stemming from? Well, I already mentioned it and I touched upon it earlier. This interest is stemming from the increase in job growth from the social worker industry. The industry and those jobs are actually growing at almost twice the rate of any job or occupation in the United States currently. And we believe that this is a great time for young individuals who are interested in the field to get in and use PYD as a way for them to be ahead of their peers. Not only is it a fast-growing industry, but the DC metro area is a top 5 area when it comes to wages for people in these positions. So youth services, child social workers, etc. And finally, we looked at websites such as Indeed.com, LinkedIn posts to find out if recruiters really were looking for this certification. We found that a majority of them wanted youth development experience or training for their applicants. Finally, we want to look at the market size. So we have the interest, we know what kind of students we want, where do we start? After looking at the club and organizations and their missions of the 2 local universities, University of Maryland and Georgetown University, we found that 33 of them and about 1,900 of their students are actually involved in one of these organizations. So we already have those missions aligned. Now we want to target these students and we want to actually reach out to them. For the $22,000 revenue estimate, it only takes 10% of that number to actually attend the conference for it to be feasible. And so we think that this is a really big market compared to how many of those students we need. Now, in order to figure out what's part of the conference, how do we organize it, we're going to have Aditi talk more about the details and what's in store for the participants of the PYD conference.
Thanks, Jeff. So we estimate and we project that LAYC should have an 18-month deadline for this conference, split up into 3 6-month semesters, as this is what best aligns with the timelines of the schools involved. So in the first semester, the priority should be reaching out to 1 to 2 high-profile organizations in Georgetown and the University of Maryland whose missions align with ours of economic empowerment for youths. During this process, what we're going to do is we're going to be talking to them about the PYD curriculum, kind of talking to them a little bit more about our mission, and also seeing what they envision this conference to be like, because we want to take their interests into account. During the second semester, we're going to be engaging a lot more with them in a sort of review feedback, because we want this to be a give and take. So we want, since we've never really targeted the college market before, this will be a great way to improve for the future, especially for long-term growth. In addition, we'll focus a little bit more on the logistics as well, most specifically searching for sponsors and also potential venues. And then in the third semester, we're going to be really focusing on marketing and outreach. We want this turnout to be as high as possible so that we can get a great market size and start this new initiative off on the right foot. Now, I'm sure you're wondering right now, we mentioned that LAYC's core competence is in salsa identification. And I bet you're wondering, how can we combine that level of customization with a huge conference where tens of organizations are going to be attending from across the school? And the answer is technology. We're going to have each of these organizations fill out a survey before the conference that pulls on internal and external sources. And then prior to the event, our trainers are going to be looking them over to find commonalities, their mission statement, and also what their needs are. And then at the event itself, these students are going to be taught the PYD curriculum in a way that's catered to them. So it's really pulling on LAYC's core competency of salsa identification while also addressing this need for revenue generation in a very scalable way. It's important to note here that even though many organizations are going to be converging on the same area, the individual teaching of the PYD curriculum is going to be in breakout rooms. So there are going to be many people in the same place, but the teaching of the curriculum itself will be taught individually to the organization, and at the end they will receive a PYD certification for this. We realize that this is going to introduce our organization to a huge potential volunteer base. And to talk more about how we will more effectively manage those volunteers in the future, I'm going to pass it off to Jared.
Thank you, Aditi. Oh, that's loud. Okay, so our team quickly realized that the most efficient way to deal with our volunteer management problem was through technology. This is the most cost-effective solution, and we examined 5 of the most popular volunteer management platforms available on the web today, keeping in mind LAYC's core mission and goals. And ultimately, we determined that Volgistics was the premium option for LAYC and its needs. We had 6 key reasons here, but I'd really like to touch on 3 for you. The first is customizability. LAYC is not a huge organization, and therefore they shouldn't pay for the features that a huge organization like Habitat for Humanity or the American Red Cross would need. Volgistics was the only software option that we examined that offered its organizations the chance to pick and choose a la carte style which of the features and functionalities it actually would most benefit for. The other good thing about this is it keeps it very affordable, which is the second reason that we went with Volgistics. Because of its a la carte nature, Volgistics was far cheaper than any of the other volunteer management platforms that we examined. Thank you very much for listening, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Hey, good morning, team, and thank you very much. You talked about an 18-month startup and development. What's the cost on that startup for that 18-month period?
Yeah, so we have a financial analysis. Jared, if you want to go to it while I talk about it. So we recognize that we needed a low fixed cost, but variable cost might be less important in this case, but we need a low fixed cost solution. So our conference idea actually builds upon the fact that our instructors wouldn't be spending their whole time working on these conferences. In fact, we estimated that it would take about 10 hours of their salary to actually work on these conferences leading up to the conference itself. So the fixed costs are low, which is great for us because if we do have inaccurate demand forecasts, we can actually adjust how many workers we send to the conference and change our fixed costs accordingly. Looking at our costs, for the upfront costs, we're expecting about $10 of sponsorship for each student, which gives us about $2,000 in sponsorship. We found that if we price it at about $100 a student, that's where we got the $22,000 revenue, but we can actually move it down to $30 and still make a net income and still get the qualitative benefits of this recommendation. So we do realize that there are some time commitments involved, but we think that the fixed cost in terms of money is very low, considering that it's very variable in terms of our recommendation on how many students and how many organizations sign up.
Can you just tell me a little bit more about who you envision attending these conferences? Because it wasn't very clear to me. And then also, I mean, are these other people who work in nonprofits who need this training? You seem to make a connection that it would also increase volunteerism. So I'm assuming that you're also envisioning maybe people who don't work at other nonprofits that would need this education or this credential. And then how does it potentially tie into a credential? Because it seemed like there was some value there, but if it's just going to be a short-term conference, is there any credentialing possibilities that you've thought of?
So I'll take some of the first, I'll take a few aspects of the question that are relevant to my section. So first, when you're talking about who we really envision this conference for, which I believe is one of the first parts, we really wanted to target the college market. We felt that we really wanted to target especially the students in social work and education or pre-social work and education because they were the ones who would feel most passionately and aligned the closest with our mission so we could get the highest retention rates there. We are aware that volunteer rates among college students overall, holistically, are rather low. However, for our target audience, which aligns very well with our mission, we expect them to be a lot higher. However, the main aspect of this conference isn't necessarily to get more volunteers, even though that would be a wonderful positive externality, but rather to gain revenue, but also have more college students be PYD certified. And we actually have a slide on certificates versus certification, which might answer another aspect of your question, which is who is qualified to give out certifications? And it's really any business who has some sort of skill assessment that they'd be able to do. And through this conference, we'd be able to, at the end of it, provide some sort of assessment for the students so that we could say they are PYD certified at the end of this. And so that is something that they could put on their resume, and it would boost their job prospects as well.
So I noticed that the PYD curriculum is typically 42 hours long, and I was just curious how you would think that that would translate into a conference.
Hello? So going off that, we actually mocked up a schedule for you guys to see what it would look like for a Saturday. It would be a conference that would be 9 to about 5:30, and what we would do is the first half is geared towards finding out what your organization's special salsa is and figuring out what your mission and how that aligns with your mission, as well as the results per organization. And then in the afternoon, we wanted to take key aspects of all the modules that LAYC already offers and condense that down to a more palatable thing solution for organizations. We also looked online to see what other providers were doing, and they also have training sessions that were about 2 hours long, 10 hours long, one day, depending on what your needs were. So we thought that with this, we could work with LAYC to condense down their training module to a afternoon schedule for students.
Excuse me. So, did I understand you correctly in your presentation where you said there'd be an 18-month preparation period for the conference? What is that exactly based on, the 18 months? Why 18 months? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so we picked the 18 months for a couple reasons. One, it's a relatively new task, and for PYD, they don't have any experience or historical experience of hosting something like this, so we do want to get the student expertise, and that's why the first semester does focus on the champions that we can establish on the campuses. Another reason why it's 18 months is because we do want to mitigate the risk of a marketing or a branding error, or we don't want to break what's not broken. And LAYC has a great reputation, so we want to make sure that it is well thought out and it's well organized, and that our reputation is strong. One of the reasons why the PYD certification from LAYC has clout and it has a strong, it has a strong name behind it is because LAYC is a respected organization in the community. So we don't want to hurt that brand value because it will actually dilute our certification. We want to make sure it's great, it's rolled out correctly. We want to make sure the right champions are on campus, and if they aren't the right champions, we can switch to another organization to champion our event. So the 18 months, we felt about 3 semesters is enough time to do so, to go through the screening, to go through the visioning and the feedback cycles necessary.
Another question in terms of like a big picture strategy and the programmatic mission of LAYC. I mean, they're really not involved currently in higher education. They're kind of involved in training their internally people within their organization, and potentially maybe the way I read the case is maybe training other people who are involved currently in the industry and youth development. You're talking about basically training the next generation potentially of workers, but who are currently students, and kind of being involved in higher education from that perspective. So I'm kind of struggling a little bit. How does that all fit in with their current mission and their current strategy of the organization?
Yeah, of course. So one reason why we didn't want to target other nonprofit organizations is we realized this market is already very saturated. 2 of the top competitors, I think it's called High Scope and also DC Trust, they've already trained around, I know DC Trust has around 270 organizations already done in the DC area, and the DC area only contains around 520-ish organizations that have to do with youth development. So that market is already very small. Also, DC Trust has trained about 1,300 individuals in this as well. So we didn't want to compete in a very high-stake, small margins area. And that's why we decided to focus on the next generation, is because these are the individuals who are going to the School of Social Work, the School of Education, because they are passionate about these issues. Also, the individuals who join these clubs, are very passionate about social justice work. They are passionate about youth development and education. So we wanted to align our organizations, or LAYC's organizational mission, which is to develop and help younger generations understand and train younger generations to better lead in the areas of youth development with universities.
In terms of, you have the 18 months we talked about. In terms of sustainability, how do you think about sustainability? How are you going to keep this going? What's your next step after you've got it up and operationalized?
Right. So it is a university-based growth model, and the reason we did this was, one, because we do have that university funding. Universities do tend to fund clubs or groups that do want to go on conference trips or host conferences. We actually have a large list of a variety of universities, not just big public schools, small public schools, private schools, a wide range of colleges here that we want to show that already do sponsor organizations or students who want to go on these conferences and actually get paid to go on these. So this quick glimpse kind of gives you an idea of how limitless this growth model is, which is that we can find at almost any cluster of universities in a metro area or in a small cluster of schools, we can find growth in those universities no matter what type of university it has to be. So it doesn't have to be a university that's here in Washington, D.C., that's in a metro area. We see Syracuse University, as one example, does fly their students out to conferences, and we found a long list of other universities that have a history of doing so too. So it is a very limitless, and it's not limited to any geography, any type of school, or any type of private, public, income, et cetera.
Hi, thank you guys. So my question is, one of our biggest challenges with even considering putting PYD out there was how it was going to be staffed. Just because our own experience is the developing, the implementing, the facilitating of the 42-hour curriculum, even in-house, is quite time-consuming, and we do not have any one dedicated staff person to that. So for something as large as a major event like a conference, where you also described that each of the club-based participants would be getting their own tailored breakout, that sounds like a lot of moving parts, a lot of staff, and at multiple facilitators for training, at least 3 per breakout. So how do you see this being staffed and supported against the existing LAYC jobs and responsibilities that we have? And how would it be funded to staff that staff time?
Right. So we've already shown the financials, but I can go over the assumptions. The assumption is that we have from our Q&A, we learned that we have about 20 staff right now that are trained to give these trainings or PYD curriculum courses. Using the assumption that out of the salaries from the expenses sheet, we took away the big salaries like the CEOs, the CFO salaries. We divided by the remaining employees. We found that each employee makes on average about $43,000. We put that on an hourly basis, and we dedicate about 10 hours of that salary to the curriculum development. Now, keep in mind, it's not a 42-hour curriculum. It's a lot more condensed, so it doesn't take as much time as the current PYD curriculum that happens in-house does. We take that, we actually get the salary calculation as one of the expenses under curriculum development. And then finally, we're using these 20 instructors, so we're doing more like a shared work, so it's not one person doing 40 hours a week for the conference, it's 20 different individuals, so the workload is shifted among 20 different shoulders. And by doing this, we think it's a lot more fair of us to ask each one of our trainers to take 1 or 2 days out of their weekends per year to host these conferences, and as we obviously increase the number of trainers, they would do less and less. So we think that it's a small task to ask for a very big outcome and a very big revenue generator for the organization.
And just to build a little bit off of what Jeff said, this is also kind of where the beauty of the university model comes into play, because remember, universities not only pay to send their students to conference, but will also pay to co-sponsor or host a conference. So we envision a model that's sustainable because we'll partner with universities that we already partner with, like Georgetown and Maryland, and allow them to assist our organization both in the legwork and the prep work, because they have obviously a lot more time and resources than full-time working professionals at our organization, and also monetary resources to be associated with a youth development conference like this. It creates a much more sustainable model in terms of funding and in terms of man hours needed, so that our trainers and facilitators don't have to be there, setting up pizza or waiting for the Domino's guy to get there. We're going to be utilizing the student organizations that will co-sponsor or kind of champion the event on campus as the legwork behind that setup and prep work.
Great, thank you. My second question was, I was pretty surprised to see the condensed curriculum from 42 hours to 5. That's quite a significant change. And so I was hoping to have a little bit more time to hear you guys talk about that and what that would look like. Because part of what we think makes our PYD curriculum unique is that it's both the core competencies for youth development paired with strategic team building, because you're training a unique set of staff for a unique organization and their mission. DC Trust doesn't offer team building because anybody can go to their trainings. So you get the core competencies, you don't get the team building. And that's part of why the curriculum is over 42 hours. So can you speak to the decision to cut it down so much, and how do you think that would, or what were your impressions about how that might drastically change the nature of PYD and what we're trying to push?
Yeah, so to answer your question, from what we looked at the original model, which you suggested, which to license out this curriculum, and realized that if we were to hire a full-time worker, we would probably have to have one individual who's a full-time staff at $40,000 and another individual, doing all the coordination, the scheduling for, let's say, $25,000. That's a huge upfront cost that you guys might not have the cash or resources to divert to right now. Not only that, but a lot of your clients will be nonprofits, and they might not have the ability to pay $300 per individual to get trained.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, great, thanks.
The mic was not working. Conclusion time now.
Okay, great. Well, firstly, we'd like to thank you all very much for listening to our presentation today. We've had a great time really digging into LAYC, and it's a great organization that we're really proud to say that we've worked with. I'd just like to touch over some highlights of our group's recommendations here today. Firstly, we wanted to keep LAYC's core goals and missions in mind in every single recommendation that we considered. It was important to us that even though we were switching towards revenue generation goals, none of LAYC's core missions or goals of empowering youth in the DC area would be sacrificed. And that's why we ultimately arrived at the decision to scrap the PYD licensing idea. We found that the market was simply too saturated and that the barriers to entry were too high in terms of monetary cost and hours that LAYC would have to dedicate to getting this licensing curriculum off the ground. And with that in mind, we shifted our focus to try to come up with a revenue-generating idea that really played to LAYC's core competencies and didn't sacrifice their mission at all. So that's why we came up with the PYD conference idea. It allows LAYC to utilize their core competency of engaging youth and instructing youth in real-world issues, and also can do so at a much lower fixed cost and a much lower time cost than a licensing curriculum solution would offer. In order to implement that solution, we think that it's critical to partner with clubs and organizations on university campuses. One, to generate interest and buzz about our idea, and two, to make it a sustainable model so that LAYC can generate revenue for its organization without sacrificing necessary people, man hours, and resources. Utilizing university clubs to help us do the groundwork is a critical component of this recommendation, and it's one that we believe is feasible given the market size of university students interested and excited about working in youth engagement, social justice initiatives within the DC area. And finally, we recommend that in order to deal with the increase in potential volunteers and also its existing volunteer management strain on its workload, that LAYC adopts Volgistics as a volunteer management platform to better manage its existing volunteers and allow it to manage any increase in volunteer hours that it would have moving forward. There are, of course, some risks associated with these recommendations, and you astutely brought many of them up in your questioning. So we'd like to just talk a little bit about how we see them being mitigated. Firstly, if the conference is not profitable and there's low interest, that would obviously be a problem. But we think having an 18-month time frame and also a low fixed cost model that's not really dependent on attendance for profitability really mitigates these risks here. Secondly, we don't have effective resources to carry out a conference. And we believe that this is mitigated by the fact that universities already aggressively fund student opportunities for academic engagement outside of the classroom and are more than willing in multiple previous occasions to partner with non-for-profits to help educate their students outside of the classroom. Third, what if we fail to establish these partnerships with youth organizations? That's not our bread and butter, and it's not what we do on a regular basis. As you pointed out, higher education is a new area for us. But we've determined that the interest is there. We know that there are student organizations who engage in similar type of activities to LAYC already, and we know that they have similar core values and mission statements to us. Within the 2 schools that we already partner with, there are as many as 1,900 members in clubs dedicated to working on these issues. So our assertion is that the market is there, and the size is robust, and even if we can only capture 10% of it, we can still really create a profitable product that increases self-sustainable revenue moving forward. And lastly, what if this new software puts a strain on our organization? We're not data management specialists, we're not volunteer management specialists, and new technology is not really something that is in line with our core missions. But we believe that we've selected the solution that is the most easy to use and the most easy to integrate, given that it's completely online and requires no system overhaul or integration, and also the most cost-effective system so that LAYC doesn't have to divert additional resources to utilizing it. And so with those risks and mitigations in mind, we thank you very, very much for your time. It was a pleasure presenting for you here today. Enjoy the rest of the presentations and the rest of your weekend. Thank you very much.